the number one objective for every living thing. What is that? Someone said it. Survival, right? It wants to survive. For animals, right, that act instinctually, that survival will mean that instinctually it will hunt or it will seek that provision that it needs to survive. So the lion will hunt the zebra and the wildebeest and the gazelle, not for malice, it's not malicious, it's not anything like that, but merely to survive. The female grizzly bear, if you get too close to its cubs, might attack you, not because it wants to eat you, but it wants to protect its cubs. Again, so either for its own survival or survival of its species or its progeny. And human beings have the same instincts, right? Human beings have the same instinct for survival. However, for us, survival is not limited to physical survival, right? There's also a type, you could say, of a spiritual survival or survival of the soul, or that which feeds the soul, but which is often mistaken for the ego. So why do people feel like they want to be praised or that they want to have status and prestige and to be seen good or lofty in the eyes of others? It goes back, I think, to the basic premise of a type of survival. Because if I am seen in this particular way, then this will ensure that I will survive in a manner, right, that I desire to survive in, and not just mere survival, right? So for human beings, it's not about mere survival, but it's about surviving in a way that they think they deserve, or they think that is appropriate for them. So that's a competing kind of tendency within human being, thinking about your own survival, and to a great extent, the survival of your own ego, and at the same time observing the responsibilities upon you, which translate to the rights of others or other things upon you. So more often than not, what will people do? They will favor that which favors them rather than that which favors the other. And as a result, mistakes can be made, right? And this is what we mean by sins and mistakes and missteps and transgressions. And that is part and parcel of being a human being, right? Every son of Adam and daughter of Adam is khatta'u khayru khatta'ina tawwabun. Everyone makes mistakes. And if we did not make mistakes, then Allah would replace us with another group who would make mistakes. So the idea of making mistakes is inherently human, right? We don't really say animals make mistakes. Animals don't sin. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. But we have been given this allotment, right, of choice and volition, where we can choose to make a mistake, or we can choose to do something else, or we can choose a myriad of things. So as a result, we can fall into sin, right? We can fall into mukhalafa, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't leave us to our own devices to figure out what are the rights and responsibilities that need to be fulfilled, but He outlines them for us. And that system that outlines all of these things is called the Sharia. Right? So the Sharia will tell us what is it that we owe to the other, and what is it that we owe to ourselves, right? Which is really what means, what do we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And when we say we owe something to Allah, that's really metaphoric, because Allah doesn't need us. He doesn't need anything from us. We do not add anything to Him by obeying Him, nor do we decrease Him by not obeying Him. So that means that what we think we're doing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in actuality is for our own souls, right? It's for our own salvation. So at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, are you fulfilling the rights of the soul, your own soul upon yourself, and are you fulfilling the rights of the others upon you? And when you don't do that, this is when we fall into a mistake, and when we fall into slip or transgression. So this requires seeking that to be expunged from our record. And the way that we can have that expunged from our record is by seeking forgiveness, right? And interestingly enough, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it much easier to seek forgiveness from Him when we make a mistake with Allah, in other words, something that doesn't affect any other living being, versus making a mistake with other living beings. It's a much harsher criteria. Why? Because ultimately, in some form, it's left up to them whether they want to accept that or not. And if you transgress against someone or something else, then they have the right to either forgive you, to pardon you, or they have the right to seek their just due, their haqq. Right? And the Quran mentions this explicitly. It does exhort us to forgive. وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Right? And to pardon others, it's closer to taqwa. So, however, it does not completely negate the right of anyone to seek their right when they are being transgressed against. But why is it closer to taqwa to let things go and not to seek your right? Because it's a very fine line. Justice in this life is never exact. At most, it will be approximate. And so when it's only approximate, if you seek justice, how sure are you, how certain of you that you're going to have it in the exact required amount and you don't go over by a hair? Because if you go over by a little bit, right, if you think of the scales of justice as a physical scale, which indeed it is, then if you weigh too much on your side, then instead of receiving justice or correcting an injustice, what have you done? You yourself have become and perpetrated an injustice. So you went from mazloom to zalim. Even though you were wronged initially, but then you went to flip to the other side, you became the zalim. You became the one who wronged someone else. And then you could see how the cycle continues, because then that someone else will say, well, that's more than they deserve. And then they seek retribution of justice, and they go a little bit overboard. And hence, we have this back and forth, a vicious cycle of injustices being perpetrated from one group to the next. And the only way, right, the only way that it can be completely terminated, or at least put a hold on, is if one side chooses to forgive. If they don't choose to forgive and they seek the back and forth, it will never end. It will be back and forth and it will last generations. And this was, in large part, how it worked before Islam, in the Jahiliyyah, right? Where there were no rules, or the rules were kind of unwritten, and it was very, it was dependent upon the strong overcoming the weak, and the weak having to put up with the strong overcoming them. But when we talk about justice from an Islamic tradition perspective, then yes, it's approximate, but also it seeks to be just, right? It seeks to achieve societal harmony and cohesiveness, but it also recognizes its own shortcomings, right? Two of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Hakam al-Adl, right? Al-Hakam al-Adl. He is the one who is the judge, the supreme judge, and he is justice. So nothing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yahkumu bi will be unjust, right? Allah doesn't do dhulm wala mithqala dharra, right? He doesn't, وَمَا اللَّهُ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. Allah is not unjust to any single thing. Whereas from the human perspective, we are unjust to one another. So forgiveness, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, from two aspects. From you seeking forgiveness for your own mistakes, and you to be forgiving for others' mistakes. And I would say it's kind of ironic and أَلَا تُحِبُّوا أَنْ يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, right? And this came in Surah An-Nur, when the hadithat al-ifk, when the lie that was prevaricated and that was spread about Sayyidah Aisha, radiallahu anha. One of those people who perpetrated this, his name was Mistah. And he was a relative of Aisha and a relative of her father, a cousin, I believe, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And as-Siddiq, when he learned of his role, and it's even mentioned Tafsir al-Qurtubi and others, that Mistah huddah, in other words, the had punishment of 80 lashes was applied to him for spreading a false rumor about Muhsana, about Afifa, like Sayyidah Aisha. So he was someone kind of already, punishment was applied to him, and he's basically convicted, he did it. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he said, Wallahi, I'm not going to, he used to support him. Mistah was destitute, and he had no other means of support except that which he received from his cousin or his uncle, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So he said, I'm not going to spend on him anymore. I'm not going to do that. And then the Quran rebukes Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Right? It said, those who are of means should not decline to spend that which they were used to support those. When Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, this ayah was revealed, he said, "La, khalas, wallahi, I will spend as I used to." Right? And then the Quran said, "Do you not wish to be forgiven just so that Allah will forgive you, so do you not forgive others?" So forgiveness then is completely, inextricably linked for your own ability to forgive. Don't make the mistake of insisting upon forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because you see that all the things that you do are justified and it was a mistake and you didn't mean it. But yet, when it comes to others who may make mistakes with you, you don't accept their excuses. You don't even, you shouldn't even have to make people come up with excuses to begin with. You should be actively making excuses for them. In other words, don't wait for them to say, "Sorry, I didn't mean it. It was actually like this. I didn't want to do it like this." But you say in your head, before all of that happens, subhanAllah, yani the brother probably, he didn't notice, he didn't realize, I'm very sensitive, it's done, it's finished, move on with it. Imam al-Sha'rani, actually, Abdul Wahab al-Sha'rani, rahimahullah, he says that the awliya, what they used to do is say, when someone made a mistake with them, they'd say, "Hada shaytanu," right? That's his Satan who pushed him to do that. Satan waswasa lahu, he whispered to him, he caused him to make these accusations or these missteps with me, and I don't like shaitan, but that's my brother, or that's my sister, or that's someone who otherwise I would not, I would be forgiving with. So those two are linked: your ability to forgive, and then you seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.